Hi, my name's Keith Cooper, Northlight Images. I test a lot of printers, do a lot of printer reviews, and as part of that people ask me questions about printing and related issues. And I've had several people ask me just of late, what's all this about the printer ink cartridge scam? And I went, what scam? And it seems there's been a bit of a kerfuffle because somebody else has discovered that if you buy a cheap printer, you don't get much ink with it. Now, I thought, is there more? I've had a look into this and various bits and pieces, but people are asking, printer ink, is it expensive? Yes, it's expensive. It's always been expensive. But what about this about cartridges with almost no ink in them in very cheap printers? And I thought, well, they've been doing this for at least 30, 40 years, I think, since, well, maybe not quite that long, but at least since the first inkjet printers came out. The problem is that if you buy cheap, you pay later, or pay twice, or pay multiple times in this. If you see a printer being advertised for, let's say, 40 quid, I'm in the UK, so it's, yeah. If you see that, you think, my first thought is, oh, that's interesting. That's going to cost a fortune to run because there's nothing new about this. The principle is even known as the razor and razor blades model of sales, in that you sell one aspect of a system cheap, and then the consumables are where you make your profit. It's interesting that this one is often attributed to Gillette, although it wasn't they weren't the people who used it, but it's often, you may hear, called the Gillette model. Not technically true. Kodak used it for cameras for years. They almost give away cameras and then charge you a fortune for the films and the processing and everything else which they got. So there's nothing new in this. And first of all, my thought is that somebody could look so genuinely surprised at discovering that, in this case, I believe it was a $49 printer, you didn't get much ink in it. Well, yeah, what's new? Nothing really. It comes down to what you actually want from a printer. Now, if you're just after something for very occasional prints, every month or two, something like that, it might possibly be useful getting one of these ultra cheap printers. I say might because you've only got to decide that you've got to print an extra long document or want to print a few more bits and pieces, photos and things like that, and you quickly discover the cost of replacement inks. Well, yeah, where's the surprise in this? And of course there's lots of outrage, but then the internet's made for stuff like that. So, don't expect cheap printer, you will pay for it. But that's not the point. People are saying, well, what about better printers? Does this apply to them as well? Yes, to a lesser extent though, and I certainly would never use a word like scam. If you are really wanting to save the pennies, then by all means look at alternative ink systems, refillable ink systems. These have been going for years. I don't test them because my aim in printing is for quality, not necessarily the cheapest of prints. So all my reviews, I've got loads of printer reviews, and I put a big list of them in the notes of some of the more recent ones that might be of interest. But I'm looking for quality in printing. When I'm looking for quality in printing, I know that I'm going to have to pay for it to some extent. Now, this has changed of late because more recently, ink tank printers have come out. Now, this is an ET 8500 that I reviewed. 8550, I should say. It's the A3 Plus 13-inch version. The 8500 is the A4 8.5-inch version. That's a printer where you refill the ink tanks. There's a Canon version. That's a G550. Now, I'll come back to some specifics of some of these in a bit, but it's something that we're seeing more and more of. So if you are after cheapness, and that is an overriding principle, then refillable ink carts. Now, there's a Canon ink bottle. That has 70 ml of ink in it and costs a tiny fraction of what you would pay were you to actually try and get ink in ink carts, particularly some of the cheap printers. There we go. there is a bottle of Canon magenta ink. Now that's a pigment ink. I'll come back to the differences, pigment, dyes, things like that, what you might want to consider in it. But essentially, if you are after quality, you are far better to spend a bit more on a printer. Now, these are becoming more popular, this style of printer, but they're not universal. You'll still get ones with cartridges. Even the Canon Pro 300, Pro 200 are both very good printers, but they have relatively small cartridges. Now, if you take one of those cartridges far, you won't be able to hear the ink sloshing about necessarily in them. They all have different designs how they're done. But the key with the expensive cartridges is you often get a new print head with a cartridge. And that is what you're paying for in it. If you're just paying for the cartridge with the ink in it, it works out a bit cheaper. Now, I'll also put a link in the notes to a page on a US site, Red River Paper, that has an outline of potential costs per print with different types of printers, which is very useful to look at. If you're just making a few prints, that may be important for you. I'd note too that if you're going to use a printer for business, you really need to get over the cost of the printer being expensive and look at the ongoing ink costs. I noticed that one of the videos I was referred to was somebody, they wanted to print labels. And they were looking for a cheap way of printing labels for some. Yeah, I get asked this as well. I get people wanting to do greetings cards and things. If you are doing any volume, you need a better quality printer to save money on the ongoing ink costs and the actual costs of running things. So it is by... Yes, there are some printers that I will go, ooh, that's, you know, those cartridges are expensive. But I'm minded to say that's your fault for buying them and not looking closely enough at there's no shortage. I mean, my reviews are long and technical and I put a lot of detail into them, and I don't tend to look at cheaper printers. First of all, cheaper printers don't necessarily have the quality I'm looking for. The cheaper printers are going to be expensive to run. That's almost as a given. That is such a widely known thing that, yeah, I don't know how anyone could really be surprised by it. Well, yeah, of course people can, but if you want cheap, you're going to pay twice. As I said, it's going to cost you a lot more. Now, what do I do? What about some of this stuff I've got here? Now, I mentioned these pigment inks here. In general, pigment inks are regarded as higher quality than dye-based inks. This is a pigment ink. This is one of a set of 4. You just put these bottles, and the same type of bottles you see here for this little G550. There's other versions of this with different numbers. I've got quite a detailed review. The Canon ones, the Canon low-end printers do have a serious issue if you're a Mac user though, in that they don't support colour management properly from the driver. I've found a way of getting around it and have some profiles that you can use, but you'll need to have a look at the review I've done it, and I discussed the bits of that. But anyway, same types of bottles as in this picture here. They're the print heads, by the way. This is before I set the printer up. Now, that nice printer. This one here, these go for the Canon TC20M that I'm testing currently. That's a 24-inch printer, roll paper, also does sheets up to A3. It's pigment ink, 4 inks. I'm in the process of doing tests and reviews of that. That one appeals to a lot of people because it's a lot of printer for the money, and it's pigment ink, and it's this. But it's only 4 inks. So from a quality point of view, it may not meet the level you want. If you want real quality, I mean, I've got sitting just here, is an Epson P5000. Now that has 10 inks in it. And here's one of the ink cartridges I just pulled from this. You can hot swap them, so they seal, so there's no problem in taking the ink cart. There's 200 millilitres of ink in this ink cartridge. And I can hear it sort of, you know, the ink swilling about in it. This is the Vivid Magenta ink. That's a pigment, by the way, as well. If I want quality, I've got that. If I wanted economy, I'd probably this one here. Certainly if you're doing poster printing and the like, something like this TC20M could be an excellent choice for you. But I'll be having a full review and looking at aspects of this in due course. That's for that. I mentioned the Epson ones. There's the 8550, the 8500, both excellent printers. I would prefer the 8550 because I like bigger prints. There is a model, Unfortunately not yet available, I don't think, in the US, the ET18100. Now that uses 6 dye-based inks. And if you want to print glossy photos, and you only want to use glossy luster phototype papers, not art papers or something like that, that is by far and away the most economical, good quality printer that I've come across. In terms of cheapness, it's cheaper than the 8550 here. This one has a pigment black and dye-based colours in it. It's a more complex printer. This one will print on cards and do all sorts of stuff. Try and put card through the 18100 and it doesn't like it a lot. It tends to make marks on the print. It's a photo printer. So that's that. Now, you say, well, I'm sorry, that's too expensive. Well, tough. There comes a point where you go, I want these features and that. Oh, there's nothing cheap enough. Well, unfortunately, that's the way it is at the moment. Wait a bit, you may get a better version of printer like this. You may get one of these, but these aren't going to be really cheap printers. If you are in the market for a sub £100 printer, then accept you're going to pay for ink and don't look astounded and shocked when you realise how much you're paying for it. That's why you get cheaper printers. There's nothing sort of complex about it. I said pigment inks be my preference for printing artwork. Certainly these prints at the back here and other stuff I've got, they're all done on pigment inks. If I was selling prints, I'd prefer to do them on pigment inks. The dye-based inks are good these days. If you want to, there's no reason for these printers why you couldn't be even more cheap and put third-party inks in. I'm surprised, they'll probably be available at some point. There's nothing to stop somebody duplicating the contents of this bottle if they really wanted to for something like that. But remember, cheapness comes at a cost. And for me, it's just not worth it. It's why I don't test, continuous ink systems and things like that. They are, for the sort of stuff I do, they are simply false economy. They're not worth it from my point of view. Now, your economics may be different, but if there is a printer that you want, it's too expensive, well, either wait for the price of it to come down a bit, wait for deals and offers and things like that, or buy a cheaper printer and accept you're going to pay more for your prints. Now, one of the main reasons I really do like these ink tank printers, less so this one on a Mac because of the colour management problems with it, but certainly this, the printer itself is fine. So on these encourage you to experiment. These encourage you not to worry about, oh, how much does the ink cost, how much is the ink cartridges going to be. Inkjet printing has a cost. As I say, I've got a link to a page, will give you some general guides to that. If you don't like the costs of it, well, look at having your prints done for you. There's nothing wrong in that. However, you don't get the immediacy, the feedback, the speed of doing it. Having your prints done for you is much like when you used to send a film off to get it processed. There's a delay between taking your pictures and getting them back. Now, for me, that meant that the lessons learnt by looking at the pictures never really were reinforced in the way they do with the immediacy of digital. I much prefer digital since I've got no intention of going back to film. Great fun if you've never tried it, but I really have no intention of going back to it. But when it comes to printing, practice is the way for it. Now, I've got loads of videos on this channel for stuff like that. I'm not going into any more details on it. Safe to say that next time you see people yelling about the inkjet price scam or how expensive printer ink is, go, yeah, and? Is this new? Or is this the same story that's been going on for 20, 25, 30 years? Which I think it is. So, do your research. It's not difficult to find out information like this. And no, I'm not going to be producing videos generating outrage as I take one of these apart and discover that there's empty space in it or something. Of course there is. There's like a little sack inside this where the ink is kept. But cheap means cheap in so many ways. Just get over it. Enjoy the printing. Make pictures. We have never been at a point where it was so easy to make high quality prints. Now, there is not a 13-inch and above printer available these days that I could not, with a bit of effort, produce great looking prints. If I get a duff print out of one of these, it's my fault. Likewise, if you can't print with one of these, it's your fault. You just need to learn how to do it properly. It's not rocket science. I make mistakes. I don't, don't say I'm saying, it's difficult, but it's eminently doable. And the real joy of seeing one of your images come out as a print like this or something like that is tremendous. Has had a really powerful effect on my photography, which I do commercially as well. And ink scam, just get over it. Anyway, I hope this has been of some interest. Please do subscribe to the channel. I will be having lots more stuff about the new TC20 here and other printers as they come out, and other stuff, photographic as well. So thanks for watching again. Cheers.